Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. I'm excited to share this painting with you. A friend of mine invited me over to her beautiful yard. She had a plethora of fruits, vegetables, flowers, and even bluebirds came by to visit. I may have even filmed a wren nesting in one of her flower pots. It was an amazing visit and I have so much to share. But let's start with these blueberries. I used 100% cotton hot pressed paper. I wet it down evenly and I let that water sit for a few minutes so it absorbed into the paper. I came back with a little bit of Sap Green and Cascade Green and added that in areas strategically. I'm trying to build up light in the background because later on we'll build up darker leaves and I wanted the light to come through the leaves. The colors I used for the berries were a variety of Prussian blue, Indigo blue, both by Winsor Newton. But later on in the painting, I'll come in with a very special color that my daughter gave me, Sleeping Beauty by Daniel Smith. Sleeping Beauty is such a beautiful pigment, and while it's a little bit pricier, this was the perfect opportunity to use it, and I should use it more often. It's almost like, why do we save the good china for special occasions? Just use the good stuff. I also used a light wash of Sap Green mixed with a touch of Hansa Yellow Medium by Winsor Newton for some of the berries that were on the green side. For the darker berries, I used the Prussian blue mixed with some indigo blue and then added even a touch of the Winsor violet. So this is our first layer of the berries. I'll come back in after they dry and add some more details and some of the shadowing. The berries on my desk are not from her garden. They were not ripe yet, and I didn't dare pick them. It was tempting, but I wanted to leave them on the bush so she can enjoy later. These are from my local store, and they are in no way as beautiful as they were on the bush. I like to paint things that are repetitive in their techniques. It just helps me relax and get into a good rhythm, and I can kind of decompress and put aside all of the other noise in the world for a moment. This painting did take about an hour and a half. I stepped away, I went outside, I did other things, of course, but all in all, it took about an hour. I sped it up a little bit so you guys don't have to sit here for an hour and watch me paint. But if you're considering picking up that brush, just know that things like this, you can, of course, reduce the amount of berries that you do, but it takes time. And watercolor is a opportunity for you to really focus on something other than what's going on around you, which is okay. We're allowed to do that. We are allowed to take a moment and just be in the beauty of what God has created in front of us. Take a moment to decompress. Take a moment to tell people around you, like, I'm busy, I'm painting. It's kind of like turning on the vacuum. People don't bother you when you're vacuuming or mowing the lawn. People don't typically ask questions when you're mowing. This is the same thing. They can see that you're focused and you need your time. Take advantage of it. And in the meantime, you're creating something beautiful. Now we're doing the bottom of the berries. And while it looks complicated, it really isn't. You're making a star, a curvy star underneath the berries, and you can do as many or as few as you want. I went ahead and just did probably about half of the berries that are showing because, they could be facing anyway, right? So I just made a little flower of about 5 or 6 points, and I used the color of the berry itself. So if it was a green berry that wasn't ripe yet, I used a darker green pigment. If it was red, I used a darker red pigment, or more on the purple side. The blue, I used a darker blue or indigo. And then I went ahead and built up those shadows inside of the flower. And just in case inquiring minds want to know, that part of the berry is called the calyx. The calyx is what's left over from the flower. Every flower has what's called sepals, which protects the actual petals. And so the sepals are what's on the bottom of the blueberry, which are just left over from the actual blueberry flower. Now you know. And this is where the magic happens. I'll come back underneath where I made the flower, but not too close, and create a separation of the flowered part with a darker pigment. You'll notice the pigment I'm putting down is not very wet, so it's a very thick consistency. And if it got too wet, I would come back in with a dry brush and kind of smooth it out. They call that feathering. That is my new number 0 round, which I was thrilled to get, and it's been very helpful. I'm coming back into the red berry. I want to take a second to point out what happens here, other than that fruit fly flying around. As I'm making the flower at the top of this berry, I put in way too much pigment right there. But all you have to do is come back in with a dry brush and wipe it away. Feather it out, and then it's gone. This is probably why I picked up watercolor versus any other medium. There were options, but when I started painting with watercolor, I loved the way you could erase your mistakes. I loved the way you could fix any errors, almost any errors. There are some pigments that are a little bit more staining than others, but you can still remove most any mistake. I'm adding a little bit more pigment to the middle of the calyx, and I'll also come back around to the other ones that have dried. I want to make sure that the calyx tube is showing enough. The actual hard parts on the ends of the berries are the persistent parts of the sepals. This is where your handy dandy 0 comes into play, getting those small areas. You don't have to have a 0. I've been using a number 2 for the longest time, and it's worked just fine for small areas. But what I found is when my hands get shaky, a number 2 is a little bit more complicated to control, but this number 0 has really helped. I was also using my liner brush for smaller details, which works, but boy, I really like my number 0 round. If you have not painted anything before and are considering watercolor and you're wondering where to start, my recommendation is to make sure that you have good paper. The brushes come later. I would get a good watercolor brush. It doesn't have to be Princeton. It doesn't have to be top of the line. Just a middle of the road. I started off with the brand name at my local craft store. But there definitely is a difference with the paper. If you don't have decent watercolor paper, the water will just sit on the top. This is a good example of how the paper works with the pigment. If you go back to the beginning of this video, when I put the water down, I let that paper soak in for probably about a minute before I started painting. That's how quickly it should soak in. However, I've had paper before, especially early on, when it took about 5 minutes to soak in. Sometimes it never really soaked in, and that depended on the quality of the paper. Sometimes it'll say 100% cotton, and it really means the leftover cotton parts of the plant, which again, if that's what you can afford, that's fine. But what you want to look for is just a good middle of the road quality. I can make some recommendations if you want to message me. I'm happy to do so. I am not sponsored by anybody, so I won't make any names here. I have used quite a few different brands, so I have a few recommendations, and then I also have a few that I won't recommend. So message me if you need some recommendations. Now I'm coming back in with my detail brush, and I'm adding in some shadow, some darker pigment where the natural shadows would be. Right there I had too much water, so the pigment kept running into the green berry. So I just used my towel to mop up most of the water, which added a nice little highlight to that berry. So it turned out to be a nice effect. So coming back in, making sure that that berry is in the back, and so it's going to be shadowed by the green berries. So I wanted it to show that it was behind everything. And then that green berry was lost, so I had to come back in after the pigment dried. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't lost in the process. I'm using a little bit of Cascade Green. I mixed it with some Prussian blue, and I added the calyx. And the rest of the berries are the same process. I want to make sure that the calyx is highlighted. I'll also come back in and give a light dry wash on some of the berries that had a hint of the red as it's ripening. Some of the green berries had this beautiful touch of red, or the blueberries had a touch of red as well. As the blueberries dry, their pigment will kind of lighten up a little bit. So I want to let them sit for a minute, and I'm going to focus on the branches. The bush itself was not very tall, but the branches kind of curved over. So all of my branches in my painting will be pointing down. And there's a good video of how the bush is formed. So beautiful. I used for the first branch just a mix of the Prussian blue along with some burnt sienna, and then the branches underneath that are more in the shadows, I used burnt umber with the Prussian blue mix. The leaves were very simple and basic, so I just used my Watch when I make this leaf. You take your pigment on your brush, touch, press, release. And that uses the shape of the round brush to create the shape of the leaf. I came back in with some more pigment because that one is on top and I wanted it to cover up the other leaf underneath. Make sure when you're making leaves that you're using different shapes. If you think about it, there are no two leaves in nature that are the same color, shape, or size. So it shouldn't be that way in our art pieces either. This is my liner brush, so I'm just coming in and making one simple line. I'm using artist discretion, which is a wonderful tool, probably the best tool that we have, to not add any more lines than just that single vein. And I'm not even going to add a vein on every leaf. I want the berries to stand out. That's the important part. I have videos where I do an entire group of hostas, and that's what's important. But when your focal point is a berry or a bird, you can choose to not put the details into every other piece. That is the beauty of art. I'm coming back in with my small brush and just making sure the calyx and some of the smaller details wasn't lost as it dried. I'm using a very light wash of the pigment, making sure I feather it in so it looks more like a shadow instead of a line. And I'm taking my time. Watercolor for me is not something that I sit and do like a job. I do this for enjoyment. I may go for a walk in between. I may have lunch. I may talk to my children. Share in comments what it is that you do. Do you go for walks? Have you seen anything beautiful lately? Do you take photographs of it? Have you ever thought about possibly picking up a paintbrush and instead of recording your life in bits and data and bits, recording your memories this way? What a beautiful way to pass on the way you see the world. As I finish up this piece, I'll take off the tape, which is always my favorite part. I don't know what artist doesn't enjoy that the most. You'll notice all my blueberries are gone too. They were good. Maybe my dog ate a few, I'm not sure. But I hope you enjoyed this painting, and I hope it encourages you to pick up a brush, maybe go for a walk, ask a neighbor if you can visit their garden, and I am so thankful for my friend for allowing me to come see hers. Look for more paintings soon from her garden and mine and the world around us. Bye-bye.